journalism. We are delighted to be the co-sponsors of today's panel, and I'm very happy to be here. My colleague and CCM's co-director, Karen also wanted to be here, but she had to travel outside the city, so she had to miss. But she sends her good wishes to the panel. Before I invite today's moderator to take over, I would like to tell you a little bit more about what we do at the center, and also a little bit more about the media landscape that we have, especially on the ethnic and community side. The center was approved by the CUNY Board of Trustees in 2012. And we have been working very closely with the New York-based community and ethnic media ever since. We basically work in 5 major areas. VoicesOfNY.org is a flagship project where we showcase the work of the community and ethnic media by publishing the stories, the translations of the stories which is originally are published in other languages, and also we produce lots of original work. Besides that, we acknowledge and honor the good work of this media through journalism awards, which we call the IPPES Journalism Awards. We give it away each year in 10 different categories, and we give away like about $9,500 with cash prizes as well. And the idea again is to acknowledge the work of this media, to promote the work of this media, and there are very, very few organizations basically which are doing that. Besides that, we organize lots of trainings for the journalists from this media, because we feel that this media serves as a bridge between the mainstream and the communities, the different communities that we have in this city. And I will tell you more about why this media is more important when it comes to serving as a bridge between the mainstream and the communities. Besides that, we organize access to information programs. We call it Newsmakers Series, where we invite different public officials to our university, and they talk to this media and answer questions that are important for their respective communities. And the last one that is one of the last area of our focus is some research and documentation of this media. We document this media. We have documented it through a directory which we call Many Voices, One City. We published it. In fact, it has been published before as well. It was originally launched by an organization, a non-profit called Independent Press Association, which later became New York Community Media Alliance. And the New York Community Media Alliance closed its doors in 2011 because of funding issues. And it was at that time that the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism stepped in and adopted 2 of its programs, which are the VoicesOfNY.org, which used to be called Voices That Must Be Heard before that. And we rebranded it, we rebuilt the website, and we added more elements to it. So today, the Voices has the translations from different publications of the community and ethnic media. We also have roundups, and we also do lots of original work. And we use both our students at the J School, and also we get some work from the freelancers. Before I invite Joel and Kaiser to start the panel, just let me very briefly touch on the landscape that we have in the city of the community and ethnic media. There are no exact numbers about the number of publications that we have in the city. And when I say in the city, I mean the Metro New York area. But the estimate that we have, since we have worked with this media over the years, we believe that there are at least 350 publications, different media houses, which are covering different ethnic communities and different neighborhoods. And besides, these include like 18 daily newspapers, which are published in languages other than English. And if you look at the combined circulation, so it is about 4.5 million. This is again an estimate, and which is about equal to about 55% of the city population. This media significance increases when you keep in mind that about 1.8 million New Yorkers have little or no English language skills, which means that the primary source of information is this media. And if this media is covering only the countries of origin or like any region that they're covering, and they're not focusing on the events and the issues that we have here in the city, then certainly we are missing a big thing. And also, if you look at it, immigration is a 3-tier process. You immigrate, you leave a country, come to another country, you assimilate, and then you integrate. So when this media is, if it is not properly utilized, it can be a hurdle in the integration as well. And that's why we are trying our best to work very closely with this media, and by organizing trainings and all that I just mentioned. And that's why I say that this media is extremely, extremely important for messaging. Anybody who wants to reach out to any particular community, there is a media for that. And remember that media has a very loyal following, because that media owes its existence to the very community that it serves. If you look at them, majority of the advertisements are coming from their own community. So that's why it's a very, very reliable source for messaging. And it is in this backdrop that we organized this panel. And I won't take much of your time now anymore, and I would invite Kaiser, who is the Executive Director of the Media Consortium, and she will be the moderator, and she will introduce all the panelists today. And again, I thank you all for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jahangir. This is a really exciting panel, and we're going to try to make it as interactive as possible. I want to give a chance for all the panelists to talk, but we're going to try to keep the panelists' comments to about a half hour, and then have a half hour to have a real dialogue with you. And I just thought of this, so surprise, but I want to find out a little bit more about who's in the room. And I'm going to ask you to raise your hands. You can raise your hands multiple times. So I want to know how many of you work for universities, like are professors or something like that, are academics of some kind, okay? How many work for some kind of governmental agency? How many work for an advocacy group or an activist group? Okay. How many of you consider yourself people who are working for the media? Okay. And how many of you, like, I haven't mentioned what you do? You're like, who is this person? Okay. Okay. Maybe we can find out during our dialogue time. The way I'm going to do this is, instead of introducing, I find that when you're introduced to all the panelists at once, you forget who the heck everybody was. So what I'm going to do is introduce one panelist, ask them a question, introduce the next panelist, and then after we do that, we'll have a little discussion among the panel, and then a discussion with you. So the first question I have is going to go to Jorge Chavez, on my far right here. Jorge is the on-air personality and producer of the morning show La Invasion Mananera at WWRL 1600 AM. It's called La Invasora. Previously, he was a producer at Univision. Jorge, you work for La Invasora as a radio station broadcasting in Spanish with a large immigrant audience. I'm interested, what is your audience most interested in hearing about, say from the folks in this room? And from your perspective and the perspective of your audience, what gaps do you see in mainstream coverage of immigrants that you fill?
Thank you, Joylyn. Well, I believe I feel like I'm the bridge, because I was born and raised here in New York from Mexican parents that had to immigrate from a country that was, and at that point, not helping them create a life that they wanted, where you can have a job, education, a home where you can go to in peace. So being born in this country and at the same time keeping the same culture has made me evolve two cultures equally. And being on the air gives me the access to tell both the ones that are born here and the ones that are coming from, you know, the country that where my parents came from, as well as the other people that come from Central America. What's going on in both? Yes, I agree, things that happen in our country are very important, but at the same time, we also have to assimilate that we are here. A lot of the things that people want to know is, for example, we have the undocumented people fighting for a driver's license here in the state of New Jersey. And a lot of people were calling us in to ask where the meetings were, where it's going to be held, why is it so important to be part of it. Most of the people that are coming from countries like Mexico, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, they only come here to work. And they forget that, you know, when we're in school, we also need a little bit of their learning and see what's happening in our countries, you know, and simulate what's going on in both. And we can also help them wherever they need. So that's one of the things I believe people listen to, because they want to know what's going on both areas, both here and in their countries. I try to focus 80-20, 80 here and 20% over there, because I'm living here, you know, this is where I'm at. And I try to say it in a language where everyone can understand, which in my case is Spanish. I understand their customs, their beliefs, their religious, whatever the culture is. And that's what makes me a bridge between both. Because I can tell them, hey, listen, great, I also like tamales and pozoles and tortillas and all of that. But we also have to realize that you're here and we gotta make this our country now. We're part of this country. We gotta, you know, we have to be able to have a word out there. So my generations, being the first generation, we want to be able to uphold that. So that's my thing.
Thank you, Jorge. So I'm going to turn now to Marlena Fitzpatrick. She's the CEO of controversial alternative journalism network Latino Rebels. She has worked as a production manager for Clear Channel Spanish radio stations in Atlanta, and for the Screen Actors Guild, which is now called SAG-AFTRA, as the Spanish Language Industry Relations and Organizing Manager. She's the first Puerto Rican to receive a Master of Fine Arts in Bilingual Creative Writing degree from the University of Texas, El Paso, which is the only bilingual program in the world of its kind. Marlena, you also reach a Latino audience, but one that listens in English. Are you seeing the same issues as Jorge? Do you also feel like your role is to be a feet in two worlds, or do your listeners have a different agenda?
Oh, hi, I heard that. Yeah. Well, first of all, we cover both languages, English, Spanish, and we have seldom, but we've covered in some indigenous dialects. Yes, we see the same issues, although our audience, in fact, one of our founding members, I don't know if you had the opportunity to follow the Dump Trump campaign. Racismisn'tfunny.com. Juan Escalante from America's Voice is one of our founding members, and he's also one of our social media managers, and he's an undocumented student. We actually just signed a licensing agreement with a show, a web series, a comedy web series called Osito that right now is shown on Dreamers Adrift. The activists, they call themselves activists. That is not an unheard term. Actually, inside the actors that I used to represent in SAG, they used to just write it and call themselves activists and all the time. They call themselves undocu-queer activists. And it is a story about a gay undocumented Latino with roommates with a straight undocumented Latino, and they're depicting their own life story on digital media. So the vast majority of the audience, and it is very successful, the vast majority of the audience that follows us wants to see the controversial aspect and the taboo things that may be subject matters that may still be something that we don't talk about within our community outside of the food, which you know, we talked about, what was that, the tamales? The tamales. Oh, by the way, and I need to be very honest about this, we are also humor commentary about which I thought it was hysterical when we reported about the illegal tamales. And I kid you not, people were arrested and they confiscated over 450 tamales at LAX airport, street value of $450. Okay, so the commentary was, well, thank God those were not Puerto Rican pasteles, because I can assure you there would be a civil war. You know? But the truth is that when you talk about these things, and I see the engagement, that's what we look for, that even though we're laughing about it, we're engaging into the conversation. How ridiculous it is to call a tamale illegal. And those are the things that we look for, and those are the things that the audience looks for in both languages, in English and Spanish, and soon in Portuguese. Yes.
Fantastic, that's a great overview. I'm going to turn now to Lea Zhou. She's one of the founding members of the European Epoch Times. Born in Beijing, China, she studied German language and literature at Beijing University and business economics at University Mannheim. She was the editor-in-chief of the European Epoch Times from 2001 to 2013, before becoming the news director at New Tang Dynasty Television from 2014 to 2015. She is currently Deputy Editor-in-Chief for the global Chinese edition of the Epoch Times. Lea, you reach a Chinese immigrant population, and I'm interested in how that is the same or different from what we've heard about Latino populations, Puerto Rican, Mexican. Is it also about feet in two worlds? What are the particular issues that your audience faces, and what do you think that the mainstream isn't covering that you would cover?
Hi, thank you, Joellen. Well, the Epoch Times has publications in 21 languages, but most of them I cannot understand. I can only read English, German, and Chinese. And I'm in charge of the global Chinese version, which covers 35 countries, but we're based in New York. I'm very proud of it. Well, 88% of our Chinese readers are born in China, and that means a lot. I have to say, it is really difficult to serve the Chinese readers, simply because having lived in a society where the media is government controlled, they tend to not to trust any media. So how to gain their trust is our challenge. It's a very big challenge. But on the other side, they are the easiest to serve because the need is easily defined. In China, the uncensored information is the #1 unmet consumer demand. If we consider news as consumer good, and we just need to deliver truthful and uncensored information, and you can get the trust of a lot of readers. So Epoch Times was founded 15 years ago, exactly to meet this demand. And I have to say we are really lucky, because most of our Chinese editors and reporters come from China, so they know the language, and they know the culture, they know the difference, and they know the politics. And most important, they have learned to read between the lines. And that's most important, the interpretation. So we have to deliver a lot of news to our readers living in the United States. We cover 41 states. In our survey, we find out the #1 interesting topic of our readers is China news. And then it's local news. Yes, local news, immigration, health, education. These are the first 3 topics, and then real estate and lifestyle. Luxury goods, of course. Yeah, this is what we do. Yeah, there's a big demand, and that is where we come in.
Thank you. So now we're going to turn, we've just heard from publications that serve immigrant communities and children of immigrants. We're going to turn now to something that I consider mainstream media. Adrian Carrasquillo from BuzzFeed. And Adrian is the editor of Latino coverage at BuzzFeed, the leading news organization online. Previously, he was social media manager and an editor and producer for NBC Latino, and a producer and writer for Fox News Latino. So, Adrian, you've basically spent your entire career in mainstream news, and I'm really interested. But serving the Latino community through or at least producing Latino news through the mainstream media. And I'm interested in what challenges you feel personally as a reporter when you're covering the immigrant community. And from your perspective, what do you think the mainstream media is doing really well, and what does it need to do better?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun that I get to be the mainstream media person, because if you know BuzzFeed's history, right, BuzzFeed started very fun, and it still is very fun and shareable and all about what is popular online. And I think that a core part of what BuzzFeed is sort of, I feel, reflecting the internet back at you. And so I've always felt that there is a lot of, we have great Black culture stuff. We were one of the first sites that were really recognized for our LGBT coverage, all the way through the marriage equality fight. And I mean, I've never worked with funnier women in my life. Basically BuzzFeed, what makes it stand out that people don't know is that it's primarily led by women. I mean, I've always thought it's about 65% women, which is much different from the other places that I was. But I came, I came in through, I worked at Fox 5, then I went to Fox News for a year, and then NBC News, and helped launch Latino websites in English. And so when I found out there was an opportunity at BuzzFeed, what spoke to me about that was the large platform and the large audience, but being able to elevate voices and tell stories that are not normally told in huge popular places. And so it literally became about just doing Latino news for me at first in 2013. And as we ended 2013, got into 2014, what was happening was, what we didn't realize at the time, the successful fight for executive action and immigration on a national level. And so I was following the same pillars of what I do, which is elevating voices and making sure that the stories you're spotlighting voices that are normally not paid attention to. What was interesting about that in the executive action fight is that was undocumented voices, that was dreamers, that was day laborers, that was a lot of people, families who are undocumented. And I think that I saw most of the people here are activists. Obviously immigration is a hugely important issue. It matters to you a lot. It obviously mattered to me because I covered it, all of 2014, and then I'll tell you in a second what I'm doing now. But it's hard. It's hard. Immigration is an issue that's hard to understand. It's hard to get people to care. If the same immigration story is out there 100 times, it gets hard to kind of get that reader to pay attention. So what I was excited about was doing stories in a different way. And what we started doing was by elevating these voices of dreamers and activists and people that were, I always thought of it as, there's the folks that get invited to the White House, and as you go out, there's the folks that are exerting an immense amount of pressure, but they're not exactly plugged into what's going on inside. So bringing that all together and finding out what was happening, I thought was really key. And at the end of last year, basically, the leaders at BuzzFeed were like, well, do you want to move to the politics team? The election is the central story. And what I think is so important, and what I really have loved doing all this year, is covering the election through a Latino lens. And that brings together everything. So if the election, everybody pays attention to that, and they don't pay as much attention to what's happening on immigration. When you put those two together, people pay attention. And whenever you bring anything that kind of is a little bit outside or not as popular, but you touch it to the election, it becomes a big thing. And then in terms of mainstream media, and then I'll pass it back, I think what's interesting is that the mainstream media has a big opportunity. I'm going to bring up, I'm sure, the favorite of a lot of people in this room, Donald Trump. That matters a lot to the people that cover it, and I know that I think a lot about how we do that and what's the right way. When he comes out with offensive comments about Mexicans and immigrants at the beginning, first journalists were covering it kind of as a joke because everybody thought his candidacy was going to be a joke. When he was so offensive and so outright saying things that are outside the political norm, then people said we have to cover this. And as he has kept on going with comments, and most recently offensive comments about Muslim Americans, it has to be covered because he's the Republican frontrunner. So I think on a lot of ways, people say, you know, it's obvious that he is leading in the Republican field and he has to be covered. I do think that what is one thing that, as an example, you have to give that coverage, but it has to be critical coverage. And I think that when some of the big TV networks are just showing his rallies live without any criticism, without any analysis, you're just giving him the national audience, right? And so I think that that's an example of where the media needs to just continually just keep trying to do better, because you need to tell these stories, but when somebody is elevating an issue like immigration in a huge way, but a lot of people feel leaving out a lot of the facts, that needs to be done in a really strong way so that people aren't mistreated.
Thanks, and that's a great segue to our final speaker on the panel here, Saadia McConville, a Pakistani immigrant herself. Saadia joined Define American, an organization that uses the power of storytelling to shift the conversation around immigrants in the United States. In addition to previous advocacy roles in global health and consumer protection, Saadia spent several years as a television journalist, most recently at Bloomberg News. So Saadia, you in your life have had a dual role. You've been a journalist and now you're an advocate. And we heard folks if you were at the plenary, we heard folks ask this question: what is the relationship between journalism and advocacy? And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And if you can talk about how you see the relationship between the two. And then after you speak, I'm going to open that question up to the rest of the panelists to think about what all you want to say about the relationship between journalism and advocacy when it comes to covering immigration.
Sure. Well, I think that I still consider myself a journalist. I mean, what do any of us on this panel do? We tell stories, we share information. That's why I became a journalist. Why I switched to advocacy is because I didn't feel like I was given a platform to tell the stories that I wanted to, stories that were important. Part of that was being at an outlet that didn't really cover these issues critically. And part of it was just that I just didn't really have the energy to seek out those roles. I think that, you know, Adrian is very lucky that he has the opportunity to explore these issues. I think those are few and far between in mainstream media. And so I just didn't see my future there, and I wanted to keep telling stories. I wanted to tell better stories, and working for an organization like Define American that was founded by a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and really focuses on shifting culture so that we can create a culture that is more welcoming of immigrants and ultimately to pass immigration reform, but to also, as we've spoken about, to really view immigrants as American, which I think is crucial, and I think it's something that we're missing in the current dialogue. So I think that the relationship is really important, and I think especially as we see newsrooms being cut down to the bone and fewer resources, that I think that a lot of organizations that we work with really rely on us and view us as a resource, and we try and position ourselves as a resource and take advantage of the fact that we can share this information with them and that they trust us and that we bring them stories and we say, look, this is an issue that, as Adrian spoke about, is the most important issue in this country right now, and here are people who are actually experiencing it. These are true stories. We're not spinning you here. This is reality. And so I think that, you know, by positioning ourselves as that resource, that we really build this trust and this rapport with journalists in which we're working for a mutually beneficial relationship. And I think that, you know, part of that is the fact that it is really imperative that a great journalist is critical and is analyzing what is happening. I mean, think about it. If Walter Cronkite had never criticized the Vietnam War, if Edward R. Murrow had never spoken out against McCarthyism, what sort of a society would we have right now? So I think that that's really the responsibility of a great journalist, is not to just be blindly objective, but to actually take this information that they are able to look at all day long and say, I understand that you have another job, that you have children to take care of, that you have all of these other worries, but I'm telling you, as somebody who sees this information every day, this is the reality. Donald Trump is dangerous. You know, the things that he says are inaccurate. And I think that, you know, when a television organization just shows him at a rally and doesn't provide any of that context, it's not them being journalists, it's them being lazy and really failing at their jobs as being a journalist.
Any response?
Well, I also think that even though Donald Trump is the main hitter on that, the symbol of the Republicans, it also gives the opposite side of, okay, what are the other guys doing at the same time, you know? Not just looking at the Democrats, because they tend to be the favorite for the Latino community, for example, because they've been always helping. But we also get to see what the other guys are talking about. What is Jeb Bush talking about? What is the rest of the Republicans? What are their options? And it gives the Latino community to say, okay, maybe not everyone thinks the same way. Maybe what are the rest of the people thinking? And that's what I try to do in the morning show that I have. Trying to say, okay, well, this guy is doing this. You heard this. What haven't you heard yet? And this is what's happening. So we gotta let people know that yes, you're already in this country. Yes, you gotta be able to partake of it. If you are able to become a U.S. citizen, for example, we're trying to push legal residents already become U.S. citizens. A lot of people don't tend to do that because they don't see a reason, and we want to give them a reason. We just don't want to give. If you don't vote, Donald Trump's going to become president. No, we also want you to know that you have all these benefits as an American and integrate the whole way, because you end up winning at the same time. So that's my part.
Do any of you think that, are any of you in journalism afraid that a lot of advocacy groups are running their own news, like on their websites? Do any of you see that as a challenge? Like, what's the difference between journalists who have a kind of advocacy focus and advocates who are telling stories? How would you distinguish yourself?
I mean, at least with what we do at BuzzFeed News, it's reporting, it's not putting our opinion into it. One thing that I did think was interesting in the conversation we're having in terms of advocacy, you know, I see myself as a journalist, and we were just listening to Jose Diaz-Balart in the previous panel, and I see myself very much in that vein, which is to get voices into stories within a big platform that normally would not get out there in such a big way. An example of that is I'll do a story last year covering executive action, this year covering the election, and Jose and his producers will see it, and they'll bring me on to talk about it, or they'll bring on one of the advocates, one of the immigration activists to talk, because they are directly impacted. And in that way, you have, you know, the advocates being able to go onto national television and tell that story. And what I know always happens is they'll tell me, you know, we'll break a story, and then they'll tell me, sorry, I missed your call, I was talking to 5 other reporters. And that's good. That's good to get those voices out there. But where I think, while I don't see myself as an activist, I think that what is part of news is news judgment and deciding what is in your story, what you spotlight. And I think that a lot of mainstream journalists will turn the spotlight somewhere else. I turn it to Latinos and to Latino issues because that's what I care about, that's what's important. That's a crucial part of the election that needs to be covered. And so in that way, I think that you're basically saying, like, these voices should be heard as well. And I think that in a national way, that's really important in this time of a lot of you know, misinformation.
So in our case, we have a hybrid. We have people that we've shared many of your stories too, and we're big, you know, allies with our man here. And actually, Ricardo Varela, the founder and owner, was one of the first journalists to actually kind of like blow up the story of the $5 billion industry of the for-profit, you know, detention centers. And all these stories, we were talking about refugees and how in Central America we have that big problem, but it's not as covered. And at the same time, we have people that submit their own pieces. And one of the things that we like to do is, not at times, it doesn't work at times, frankly, but we have people that submit, and then the controversy starts, and then we have rebuttals that come as submissions, and we are very careful into giving that voice to. If you have something to say that you disagree with a piece that we published, submit your other opinion, because that's one of the things that is missing, and it is a very important component, is having that, it's not just selecting community voices. We have to engage with it, invite people to the conversation. So everybody's free to submit. A lot of people think, well, do we have to be Latino? No, you don't. Actually, our #1 audience are Anglo reporters. Yeah, yes, that's the #1 male Anglo journalists who follow us. And so we need to, shut down all those stereotypes and those paradigms and go, if you have something to say, we are here for you. Submit what you have to say. Just make sure, please, that there are not too many grammar errors. And also be very careful. One of the things that we're also careful about is we are not afraid of calling out from Coca-Cola to a politician. If we have to say something that we find either good or bad, controversial, we're going to say it. Just be very careful also that it's not just blasting someone out for the sake of, blasting someone out, or promotional consideration to the point that it's marketing. Have a specific argument, even if it's a rebuttal for something that we published before. So I think it's very important that for us to recognize that there are platforms out there like Latino Rebels that is open to the community for you to express yourselves. Another thing that we do, and you'll be surprised to know, we have 180 contributors that use the byline. People have been threatened to be fired. People have been threatened to be disowned, even deported, for submitting pieces with us because they have to say what they have to say. You are more than free to use a pen name, and we will protect your identity if you have something to say. Because we understand that there's retaliation out there, and we understand that there's people that may lose their jobs. I have one, and I'm here, and people may come to me, and I'm oftentimes telling them, let them come to me. I mean, I'm already, if someone has to attack me, let them attack me. I have a responsibility with you. I just want you to be heard and listened and read. Great. If you want to call yourself fulana de tal, you are fulana de tal. So with that said, yes, we have over 180 contributors. Some of them are high-profile politicians. Some of them are high-profile celebrities, and some of them do not hide, like Luis Gutierrez, Dolores Huerta, even William Castro have published with us. And those are the real people. So the important thing is that you can have a hybrid platform that allows for everybody to express themselves. And I step back and go, I may disagree with what you're saying, but what I care, what my opinion doesn't care at this point, is you have the right to say what you have to say.
Well, in our case more than half of the Chinese immigrants living in the United States don't speak English very well. That's a fact. So that when they have a problem, and many of them don't even speak, they only speak a little English. So when they have a problem, they go to the community leaders, they go to the advocacy groups, and talk with them. So in our case, it's very important to work with advocacy groups, and we just want to get real stories, like Saadia said, is most important rather than opinions. We want to know what's really happening with these people here. But we have another challenge. It's very difficult for us to choose what is the right advocacy topic and which advocacy organization we can really work with and we can trust them. In the Chinese community, there are many organizations. They are influenced, when not directly controlled by Beijing's government. So their objective is not to work for the community, but to reinforce Beijing's influence in the United States, including the influence on local elections. And there are a lot of advocacy groups or events, and we have to take care about. So we should take care about that we are not used by the political forces.
Thanks. I want to turn to one more topic, and then we're going to open it up to you folks, and we're going to have almost a half hour to take questions. So I want you to start thinking now about questions you might want to ask, and they can be anything from really practical questions to theoretical questions. So start thinking now. After this next set of discussions, we'll open it up, and we hope to have an interactive engagement with you. I want to start with Marlena on this question, and then we'll go to the rest of the group. Marlena, I think that everyone at this conference agrees that that the way that immigrants are portrayed in the media is an important issue. Too often, as we heard from the panelists at the plenary, we know that immigrants are portrayed through stereotypes, and that's when they're portrayed at all. I mean, sometimes the absence is more important than, you know, the presence even. And so I wanted to know if you can address that issue and what you folks are doing about it, and what you would like to see the folks in the room help us do about it.
And you can tell I can talk about that for hours. I won't. And I'm going to track back, and I'm familiar. I'll tell you some gossip. So, yeah, I've been in entertainment for many years. And in 2007, a good friend was a film director and a screenwriter, and we go to this, and I'm not going to say names, but I'll tell you. So, you know, there's everything up the union reps. We're going to pitch this to this major Hollywood studio, and it's a biopic. And the pitch goes very well, and the Hollywood producer, you know, oh, we want to do it. I was a fan. It was a biopic of this particular singer, and yeah, you know, we want to do it, but we need a legitimately black actress to play. I was in the edge of losing my job at that point because I wanted to just kind of like wrap him up, you know, but we already had the cast, and the lady, the protagonist, the principal, is an Afro-Latina. And in the back of my head, I'm going, what makes someone legitimately black? Because you have the director, who's a very feisty guy, you know, goes off. And what makes you think she's not? Well, she has a Puerto Rican name, it's in Spanish. So one of the things he did after that, oh really? So he picked up everything, and I'm talking about, it was like this $15 million deal. He picked up everything, he goes, you don't get a cent. And we walked away. I've been in entertainment for 17 years, 22 with, you know, counting music, and it is the only time someone dared to tell a powerful stakeholder no. The only time. And that's where the problem is. We need to be responsible also. You know, when you hear, let's stop making stupid people famous, that's exactly what it is. The moment you share, the moment you consume the brands that advertise and you fall into that machinery, the more you're monetizing, and we're fostering that because that's the power structure will continue to dare to say things like that to us who are struggling to get into this, you know, spectrum. Now, mind you, I know that was 2007, things have changed completely, and we were talking about that. You know, we were talking about how now the power structure has really shifted into the independent outlets, and how, you know, we're all hammered with information. Again, I can talk about this for hours. I'll wrap it up, but I think that we all need to be very responsible and understand that it all starts at home. We also need to, you know, consume what, I'm not gonna say what I believe in, but any institution, be it an advocacy group, be it mainstream media, be it a store, be it a restaurant, that follows our philosophies, because we often forget about the financials here. Having said all this, that's one of the reasons Latino Robots exists is exactly because of that. We said we don't have to follow what we call, and Adrian knows this, we call it the chanclazo videos. There's an outlet for that. People find it funny, we just don't do that. Why? Because it permeates more stereotypes, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to, you know, I started at Latino Robots as a music journalist, music before being anything, that's what I am, a musician. And actually today we published another interview with a band, and I have been very responsible on finding musicians that are very socially conscious, and they have taken their content for something that we believe in. If you do the reggaeton and the misogyny, good for you. That's people en español. We don't do that. Sorry, you know, and honestly, sorry. And I get publicists, please interview, then give me something that fits in our voice. but it is that we have that one thing that we just cannot, for the life of us, foster stereotypical portrayals, especially in the immigration. We go to Latin America and the telenovelas with all the, the subservients are of one color, and we covered the Afro-Colombian black painted face in 2015. We're still seeing content like that. I was one of the cheerleaders when Sábado Gigante was canceled. And I'm saying that unapologetically. We have, so those are the things, is turn off the TV. Donald Trump is on SNL, turn off the TV. It's those little things really do count a lot, because you send a straight message. I'm done with this content. I want to see myself portrayed as I really am, even if it's fiction. But it goes, all of us have that responsibility.
Thanks. Anyone else on the panel want to comment on that? Alex?
Well, when it comes to stereotypes, I think within, for example, I can easily say this as a Mexican American, there are two types of stereotypes within the Mexicans. There are those that are outside of the Mexican community, and there are the ones within the Mexican community. And what I want to do in the morning shows, for example, I try to laugh it out, because there's no other way out. I mean, I've heard this so many times where, oh, Mexicans are very hardworking, Mexicans are very this, very that, but what people don't understand is that Mexicans, like other communities, we're all the same. We're basically working, educating ourselves, creating businesses, creating, a community that is standing by itself, and is integrating a community like the American community. We're Americans, that's what it is. But there's always that, well, Juan doesn't know English, or Juan didn't go to school, Juan didn't do this, Juan didn't do that. And there's, for example, the American community will say, well, he's a very hardworking guy. But the Mexican community will say, yeah, pinche borracho, no, that's another, he's only a drunk guy. He works 6 days, 14 hours, wow, that's amazing. Tiene 2 mujeres, 3 hijos, y quién sabe cuántas viejas por ahí. It's always the same thing, so you never escape that. So what do? You kind of own it. And sometimes you get to fight, you pick your fights. You know what you're, like, yes, this happens, but I don't want people to see that I'm this way also. Whenever they talk about Mexicans on videos, or any media, I always see the sombrero and sarape. I never seen a Mexican with a sarape and a sombrero in my life. In my life. I've seen them with real sombreros. I've seen them with boots. I've seen them working. I've worked in the grounds in Mexico and Puebla. I've gone to the cerros. I know what it is to go out there at 4 in the morning and come back at 2 in the afternoon. But I also know what it is like to wake up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, be in the subway, smell the guy that didn't take a shower while on my way to work, and then get to work and start working 14 hours. And when it comes to stereotypes, again, sometimes you own it, and sometimes you have to fight it. Sometimes you have to say, well, I'm not with this. But at the end of the day, you are what you are, and people are going to talk all the time, so, just own it at the end of the day.
One thing that I think the internet has done is like flatten the media playing, and that's what's allowed like something like Latino Rebels, who Julio, the founder, is a friend of mine, and it's a way of, once again, just like elevating these voices and not having to go through the same institutional roadblocks that there were in the past, right? And I think that's sort of what I'm thinking with both of their comments is, you have stereotypes, and she's saying, turn off the TV, and that's totally a valuable way of showing your displeasure. And I think also working sometimes within the annoyances, which is the Latinos matter every 4 years and every 10 years, every 4 years for the election and every 10 years for the census. And so, but then that's what actually led to Fox News Latino being launched, because they were like, Hispanics are here, so in 2010. And we know that they've been here, and we know that they're Americans, and so within those annoyances, making your voices heard during the lead up to the election. And then right after that, right, it doesn't end. And so I think that when we talk about, working with advocacy groups and they're all doing their own thing to make these voices heard more, I think that that's a way you can use the internet as an example. I've spoken with people before who asked me advice, journalists who said, how do I get in my media career Latinos, and and I said, well, you should try to write for Huffington Post Latino Voices, or try to get Huffington Post blog, or write for Latino Rebels, and for a few different places. And when you have those bylines, then you can bring that to other places. And all it is about, right, is getting so that you can be heard on your issue that you care about, your issue, your organization, all that stuff.
And I would just say, one of the things that we try to do at Define American, and I think the campaign actually inspired the title of this panel, Words Matter, is encouraging media outlets and reporters to drop language that is stereotypical and that is inflammatory, like illegal immigrant or anchor babies. Because I think that what we find is that people use these words and they say, oh, well, I'm talking about just all immigrants, but they're not. They're talking about Mexicans. That's usually who they're talking about, or Latinos. And so that's something that for us really fights that stereotype. And then we also try and fight the stereotype that immigration is solely a Latino issue, because when you actually look at the facts, when you look at the numbers, the fastest growing population of undocumented and documented immigrants are from Asian countries. And so I think for us it's really working with reporters to make sure that those stories are told too, and that it's seen as the holistic issue that it is, and not just one every 4 years.
Okay, I think we're ready for your questions. So I want to remind you that sometimes people have really great questions and they are worried about whether they should ask them. They spend a lot of time thinking about it, and by the time they've come up with their question, we're out of time. So I'm talking right now just to kind of give you some space, so that if you're one of those people who always hesitates before you ask a question, especially this is true more of women than men, it's true of some groups more than others. If you're one of those people who tends to hesitate, I'm going to encourage you not to hesitate and to just ask your question because it's probably really good. So in this case, I think let's just have people raise their hands, and I'm just going to call on you, and I'm going to try to be mindful about where people are in the room and who's raised their hands first, and it's going to be kind of a crapshoot. So raise your hands if you have a question. I will call on you. Come on. All right, go ahead, Ben.
Well, I don't have to say my name. You know my name.
I see it. I have good eyesight. Okay, and stand up and speak really loudly, because we don't have another mic.
Yeah.
You can do that.
I try.
Yeah.
Number one is a comment, and the second is two questions. One is I really admire what you guys are doing. This is what is needed. I've been working in the Latino community to try to elevate the political power, not just the immigration issue, but the political power that we have to change issues. There is one thing that is always concerning to me, and that is they have seen the community, the media as a whole, not only you, but the media as a whole as a customer. So it's like, don't talk about that in the radio because they're going to turn them off. Politics is not for the radio. And so it's like, how do we deal with that part of, you want to do the right thing, but the publisher and the radio, TV, or the print don't sell what they want to sell. This is number one. And number two, how do we change the narrative that Latinos are Americans, they're not just Latinos? It seems to me like part of what is keeping us out, we eliminated the word illegal, and we can add the word American Latinos, whatever, it's used to be Mexican American. But I'm from Central America, I'm not Mexican American, but I'm a Latino. So how do we do those? That's my question. How do we battle with, somebody said to me, Ben, you want me to help you? The 2 R's. And this is what that means. Ratings and revenue, and then I can help you.
Did everyone hear the question? Okay.
So you're looking at me. So
No, I was looking at all of you.
So this goes back to what I said earlier, and that is exactly probably the main reason why. I mean, I didn't even turn off the TV like, oh, you know, I'm just gonna be bored looking at my ceiling. But if you do decide to consume whatever programming is, just be mindful of those two things that he said, ratings and revenue. That is crucial. That's what, you know, Arbitron and Nielsen Research continue to do in digital media. Every click with analytics is you know, basically tattooed there forever. And that's what they look for. What is your reach? Oh, well, okay, so every click means more money. Be mindful that those are the things that people need to be very mindful of. If you want to help out in just getting off of those stereotypical portrayals, in bad content, sometimes it's just simply just awful content, be it sexist, be it whatever, the more you continue, you spend the TSL, the time spent listening, or the more, you know, people need to understand the power of sitting in front of the TV and watching it for 2-3 hours. That is reported, and that's how they go with numbers, and they go, this is why they, you know how many times I heard, I don't know if this happened to you, Liam, but you know how many times, I kid you not, how many times I've heard Latinos do not like to look at Latinos on screen. These are stakeholders telling me that, that on our faces when we go pitch something. And then that's why the revenue and how much they spend is very minimal. Their budgets are minimal. However, you put something very important too, the spending is over $1 trillion a year. That's how Latinos, how much we spend. We go to the movies twice as much than any other community. So how do they get that data? They go, you have proven us right. You know, I'm not lying. There is an ROI, the return on investment is that. People need to know these things. So we need to stop partaking in that machinery and go, you know what? I'm not gonna go to Walmart. I'm gonna go ahead and go to a small business and buy my Christmas gifts or holiday gifts there. I'm gonna go to a Latino-owned, you know what I call that? Community equity building. So if you're gonna take a phrase away from me, please repeat that, community equity building. Finances and numbers are the #1 thing, that's all they care. That's all they care. Rhetoric. The rhetoric. I'm gonna be a little bit more personal. I don't know if you noticed, but I have an Irish last name. I have been asked, how come a woman like you got an Irish last name? By birth. I apologize, I'm not confessing to a crime. I did not commit last name jacking. When I go to visit my cousins in Ireland, I happen to be the Puerto Rican looking Irish. Only in America I get those questions. I kid you not, I have been asked everything. How come, oh, where's your husband? I'm not married. Were you adopted? I mean, I've heard it all. Yes, I've heard it all. I'm like, well, you know, they're Puerto Ricans with Irish last names, or Irish that look Puerto Rican, it just happened like that. So there's a whole lot of machinery here that we need to, cultural shift, that we need to actually educate. I have never, however, missed an opportunity to educate. I never come, and that's the honest to God truth, I never come to someone that asks me that as, you want prejudice, you're racist. I go, I have a story to tell you. What if I told you? And I tell them the story of my family. We don't have time for that, you can ask yourself, and I'll tell you. But I think that, it all starts with being overly conscious about how we spend, how we portray ourselves, what are we supporting, and, you know, understanding that, I will finish with this, understanding that there are micro-histories, that we come from diasporas. I had the opportunity to interview Locos por Juana, a band, Grammy, they just won a Grammy, and something that he said, the singer, Itagüí, he said, 20 years from now, when people are gonna ask you where you come from, you're just gonna say the city you're from. Oh, I'm from Miami. What is your ancestry? The world. And I think that mentality, but that was a very powerful statement, the mentality needs to shift to that.
Just to finish his 2 questions that he had, how do we create a mentality where the Latinos are part of this country, like Mexicans, Central Americans, South Americans, Caribbeans, we have to deal with the same problems that everyone else is, going against. Health insurance, IDs, being part of it. One of the major issues that we were holding this whole year was the New York City ID. We were also, thanks to Vera Parra, she was counting us, telling us, hey, listen, we need an outlet to let people know that we want immigrants that live in New Jersey want to be heard at the end of the day, that we want to be part of this country for having a license, a driver's license. I guess the only law they broke is getting out of their country to be alive, plain and simple. So once they leave there, yeah, you want to hear what's going on in your city, but you also have to assimilate to what's happening here, and how do you integrate yourself into this city, New York City, which is one of the best cities in the world. There's nowhere you're gonna find a Irish, Puerto Rican, a Mexican, Chinese, whatever they're from, in the same panel and talking about the same problems in the same city. So everyone's going, how do we change that? Leaving apart the flag. Yes, I'm Mexican, but I take United States flag as my flag. Yes, he's Puerto Rican. Yes, he's Salvadorian. Yes, he's Ecuadorian. We're all here. We're all going through the same problems. Let's face it the same way.
Saadia?
Yeah, I just, for the first part of your question, that's really something that we focus on too, is trying to figure out how we integrate immigrants and make them be seen culturally as actually American. And part of how we do that is being provocative and saying that there is this issue that people don't feel comfortable talking about, and I think that that is the intersection of race and immigration, and it's something that we really want to explore, because when you look at people who say, oh, well, I don't believe in immigration reform, oftentimes it's, I don't believe in immigration reform for people who are brown or people of color. And I spoke with an undocumented immigrant who was Irish last week. She's super white, and she said, I was worried going around New York City, maybe I'm gonna get caught if I don't pay my subway fare, and she thinks, okay, but then realistically, I know that anytime a police officer speaks to me, all he wants to talk about is what town in Ireland his family's from, And if she said, if I were black, if I were brown, that conversation would be different. And so that's one thing that we really try to do, is make people confront that, because I think it's an uncomfortable conversation that a lot of people want to avoid. And then just in terms of ratings, I think that what we also try to do is say, I've had a lot of conversations with executives at advocacy groups who say, I have this really, really great story, it'll play so well in media, and I say, no, nobody on this panel would really want to cover that story. It might be great to you, but you actually have to understand who your audience is and who the audience is of the media outlet that you're trying to appeal to. So for instance, we recently had a story that we wanted to place in Upworthy, and we knew that this is a really great story. It's about family reunification. It's about a woman who was separated because of unjust immigration laws from her mother for 10 years. She's pregnant. She's finally now able to go back to Mexico because she has her residency, and we caught it all on camera, and we said, what is the ideal outlet for this? It's Upworthy, because they cover these types of stories. And part of that meant that we shifted how we approached it, because it was a 5-minute story when we first did it. They don't publish 5-minute stories, so we cut it down to 2.5. So I think it's something that advocacy groups also have to start doing, is thinking more strategically about where do we want this story placed, how do we want to affect the conversation, and what is going to get us there.
Okay, I think we have time for just a couple more questions. Yeah, 5 more minutes. Jahangir?
Yeah, I just want to add what Saadia referred to, as well as other panelists as well. And having worked with this media for a really long time, I have found that when it comes to the issues, basically all the immigrants are facing same kind of issues when it comes to immigration. So now we have a great radio program that is only for the Latino audience. There is no, or I don't want to say there is no, but there is very, very little cross-community postings or cross-community even reporting as well. And I think if that also happens, so that will also spread the message. And I'm not sure if any of these panelists would like to add more voice to it, that is there any initiative where when you produce something and you are sharing it with, because remember, immigration is an everybody's issue, and it will appeal everyone. And remember, many of the community publications, for example, a person who is publishing a Nepali newspaper, and he is a recent immigrant, he himself doesn't know, she himself doesn't know much about the immigration as an issue itself. So don't expect her to write something really very substantive. But if you have some arrangement where you have this cross-community reporting or some kind of dialogue which can generate some content, I just want to pick your thoughts on that as well.
Well, let me start. Even though we're a Mexican radio station, for example, because we play regional Mexican music, I try to keep the topics as general as possible. I had callers from Ecuador, from Dominican Republic, from El Salvador, Mexicans as well. They all understand that the problem is equal for everybody. I can relate more to the Mexicans, being the fact that it's my background, but because I live in most of my life here in New York City, I understand that the problems for everybody, even though different countries, we all go through the similar problems. So I try to bring the topic, for example, again, I repeat, New York City ID, not just for Mexicans, not just for Latinos, but everybody has having that problem, from Asia, from Africa, from wherever they're coming from, and they don't have some type of ID. They want to know where they're coming from. They want to be able to go to a city office, or they want to be able to take advantage of the benefits that the ID had. So those were one of the things that we're going at, and at the same time, I had the phone lines, and I have the phone lines all the time open to let me know what's wrong with this ID and what do you want it to go from this point on. And I get calls from everybody just getting their points of view, and at the same time they're realizing, okay, well, I'm not the only one having this problem, so is he and she and everybody else. So that's what I like to do in the show. Try to keep the topic as general as possible. And yes, I give Mexican topics, but I try to integrate everybody else into it as well. So that's my response.
Leah, do you want to say something?
Yeah, maybe I have a comment for Ben. I talk about 2 R's. And I, as an editor, we talk about often 2 I's, right? Important and interesting. So we try to find a story when we ask ourselves, it is important to our audience or it is interesting. Yeah, what kind of things are interesting? Yeah, entertainment for sure, but not only that. Let's look at an example of Humors of New York. So it is so viral, and even I come from Germany, so German newspapers are reporting, on this Humors of New York blog. So for us, interesting is human stories. If you have a really good story, you can just share it with us. I think all the newspaper editors or the media would be interested in that. But of course, you have to think about who's the audience. I don't know if it is interesting for BuzzFeed about this nail salon, the New York Times story, yes. Because since New York Times has this 2-part investigation report, it is published in May, and it is, I don't know if the reporter or the editor have ever imagined what a big impact it has on the whole industry. So the industry is dominated by the Korean and the Chinese immigrants, and many thousands of them, they're going to lose their jobs because of this article. So a lot of people went to the New York Times building and protested against the New York Times. Okay, I'm very glad to see that New York Times has admitted that this report went too far. But I would really like to know how intensive BuzzFeed followed this story.
Yeah, I mean, that was obviously something where they did a lot of original reporting on that. And I wasn't familiar with all the details, but I know that they backtracked a little bit from their initial claims. So, I mean, I think that there's like a lot of different sort of huge stories that kind of one place kind of owns, we had one about guest workers, the guest worker program, where everyone it's like when you, and this is another issue about talking about immigration, there's so many parts of it, and one of them is guest workers and the reasons that there would be pros and minuses among all those groups when all those coalitions came together for immigration reform, right? There were business groups, but also faith groups, and so there's a lot of competing interests, labor, and things like that, and we had this guest worker story that two of our investigative reporters just literally spent months on, and not all places have like the resource, the ability to do that, and found out that they literally called the story the new American slavery of people coming here and just having absolutely no rights and being abused in many different ways, financially, sexually abused, and all this stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, that's obviously an opportunity you have.
Yeah, but it was a big problem for the Chinese community. A lot of nail salon owners came to us and said, well, these are our stories. We are invited to their nail salons to visit there and to talk with their workers. And the problem is, I know it is so difficult for mainstream media to cover immigrant story because of the cultural difference, because of the language barrier. But I think it's so important to be aware of the strength of the mainstream media and the social responsibility which comes with the decision was to cover, was not to cover. And I heard a lot of readers, they told us, they asked us, it will be much helpful if they can try to look at the story, look at this case from the perspective of the community. So I think in this case, maybe ethnic media or mainstream media can really work more together to have a bigger view.
Thank you. That's a really great place to close. I think if I can just take a minute, what we've heard is that, to get stories about immigrants into the media, any kind of media, the stories have to be interesting. It helps to deal with some of these issues with a sense of humor. There's got to be some, people want to be entertained. They don't always want to hear the really depressing stories. It helps to get stories that have a personal narrative and also stories that connect to another event like the elections. And also, it's really important to think about which media you're putting the story into and which media you want to get to. Sometimes it's really great to go into the mainstream media if you want to have really huge reach. Sometimes it's really good to look for places that are deep investigative places if you have that kind of story. But sometimes it's really important to get that story first in the ethnic media, community media, or independent media, places that can either can actually reflect the community, or places that will come at it with a kind of advocacy attitude and will be able to actually give the story a kind of perspective and context that makes it resonate. So I think that's a lot for us to think about. I think that there's a lot of work that has to be done within the media as well. And to Henger's point that within the media we have so much more work to do to work together to make cross bridges among media that reach different populations, and also media that are community-based and media that are going out to white populations and to a more general mainstream population. So we're just starting some of this work in a way. I think that we're at a moment where this work is really exciting, and those of you folks who are in the advocacy community, I think that you should understand that this is a really exciting moment for media, and that there's a lot of ways that you can get your stories to us. So we're going to end there. I really appreciate your time and and your participation, and we hope to see you around the conference. Thanks.